Welcome, everyone, to our fourth installment of our webinar series on fueling an enterprise content strategy. If you haven't joined yet, hi, I'm Nicole MacLean, Head of Marketing here at Composely. We've had 3 great conversations, and I know that this one is going to follow suit. Some quick housekeeping items. As always, we are recording, so you will get a copy of this as well as some of the resources we're going to talk about today in your inbox tomorrow. And then everyone is on auto mute, so I will be keeping an eye on the chat and the Q&A function, so please use those. We'd love to answer your questions. And then with that, officially, let me introduce our awesome guest speaker for today, Drew Evans, who leads content at Notion. Composely is a huge Notion fan. It is integrated into everything we do in operations as well as our content and marketing operations. So I'm really excited to get to talk to someone and hear how you guys are doing operations and get some really great tips and tricks. So Drew, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here, chat about this. It's obviously near and dear to my heart, and also it's a big part of what we think about at Notion. So happy to chat.
Absolutely. Before we dive in, though, I know we were talking before that we've been learning about some of the fun facts of our speakers during the series and some fun hobbies, but you shared that you do film photography, which is so cool.
I
And
do.
to do that in San Francisco must be such a fun landscape to get to
Yeah.
explore.
Yeah. I feel very lucky that it's we get the beautiful coast, nice city. We're like a quick 2 hour drive to the mountains, and we do have a beach about 5 minutes away from here. You might not think of San Francisco as a beach town, but it's a very cold beach town, but we do have one. So I love shooting film. It's an expensive hobby, but it's fun.
And I'm sure it's a nice creative outlet. I mean, marketing definitely can have its creativity, don't get me wrong, but to just go do something
Yeah.
purely creative and let that side of your brain run must be nice.
Yeah, it is nice, especially when I get some writer's block. It's nice to just go walk around and take my mind off of things for a bit. Doesn't always, fix the writer's block, but it helps a lot of the time. So um, it's great.
I love that. Well, if folks haven't had a chance to join our past 3 conversations, not going to spend too much time recapping, but we've heard just a lot of ideas on campaigns and ways to talk to customers and just different ways about creating content that really resonates with an audience and, of course, drives business outcomes. And all of that is great, but especially at enterprise companies, that operations piece, I think, is so important to get scale and efficiency and kind of wrangle all of the different people that we've talked about in the series that are important to creating great content. So it's really going to be our focus today. But to just level set everyone for us, what are content operations to you? Is that just a content calendar or is there more components that we should be thinking about?
Yeah, it's a good question. I like tinkering with the operations side a lot. So I think about this a lot, especially, at previous companies, I was really the first marketing hire, the first content hire, all the way now to Notion. We have a much larger marketing org. Um, and so I've kind of seen the operational scale at all these different milestones. And I think when you're early on, it's easy to think that, and like operations kind of just works out where having a content calendar is probably okay. You plug in your publish dates. It's more of an afterthought. Like as you're working, you publish something and hey, I'll drop this on the calendar. Maybe you get a week or two of foresight into what you're working on, but usually not. And but I think as soon as you start to introduce another variable into your operational workflow, and whether that's the volume of content you're working on, whether that's the different types you're introducing, new types and mediums of content, even the scale of your organization as it grows, I think that just having a content calendar kind of just it breaks down a little bit. And so I think it's super important. You have to have one, but it's kind of that like middle layer of operations in my head. And forgive the weird, it'll probably go off in a bunch of different directions, but I'll try and keep it tight. I think of it as the middle layer and like the work you're doing, the actual content creation, the writing, the drafting, the outlining, all that stuff is the bottom layer. It's underneath that. And so it's like everything that it takes to get published. And so you need some operational, like foundational operational resources in that bottom layer too. So like we think about it, we use content briefs as a good example. It like your blog post may not have all of the same inputs as like say a webinar like this, but they're all going to have the same foundational pieces. Like you need to specify your audience, like you get a description, you get some takeaways. And when you have a brief, I think it just helps keep the consistency in your work.
Yeah,
And so
I
I
think
think,
briefing is such
oh, go
an
ahead.
I just think briefing is such an underestimated component and then also skill
Yeah.
set. I think that's why AI, not, we can definitely talk about AI. It's an important to everything now, but I think that's why AI is not there yet because it
Yeah.
requires a really good brief or prompts. And
Yeah.
the thing that often gets missed, but can solve so many just pitfalls or like things that are going to get in the way. Again, blog posts versus like a big trends report that's your yearly staple piece. Those briefs are going to look different. But yeah, I love that you called that out.
Yeah. I like super important. Also, yeah, we can talk at length about AI. By the way, my quick note is as a marketer, as a content person, especially, like it's not going to be able to pick up your voice and your tone that you write with, but it's really good at unpacking and giving you different metaphors. And so if you prompt ChatGPT and say, hey, like here's this concept I would like to write. I want a visual metaphor. Can you give me a few? It's really good at coming up with crazy metaphors that really work well in writing. So maybe don't use it for a full blog post, but it's very good at
Okay,
metaphors
so
so
this
far.
question did just get submitted, and I feel like we're talking about crazy ideas.
Yeah.
How does Notion come up with all their fun TikTok videos?
It's a lot of sitting at desks. I know our social influencer team is they're just incredibly creative. And just the other day, they're sitting there and they're like, hey, we just saw TikTok. We want to do our own version. And they're like, who here is going to help us out? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm not, I feel like I'm a little too old for TikTok. I'm not actually. I'm just trying to tell myself so I don't use it as much. But um, they're very good at that. And they're keeping up with all the trends that's like, I think early on, bringing it back to operations, especially around
Perfect.
content, like early on, a lot of companies will say, hey, we need somebody to do content and social media. Very strong opinion that those are two full-time jobs in their own and often require multiple people in those functions to really be able to scale them up. So we're lucky that we have a few really amazing social folks at Notion that come up with those ideas.
How kind of, and this gets to one of the questions on like alignment across
Yeah.
teams. And in our second series, when we were talking with Manuela at Fellow, we had this conversation of having a plan, but
Mm,
also being willing and being able to change to market trends. And I feel like social is such a great example
yeah.
of like, I'm sure there's this beautiful social calendar or this plan so that
Hmm.
alignment and there are briefs and the operations to support that. But then a new TikTok video, I'm not on TikTok. I just watched them on Instagram 2 weeks later. But whatever, there's the trending sound and it sparks an idea. And of course, like that immediacy is so important in a channel,
Hmm.
like your blog, or I mean, there are some things that and the new AI thing comes out or Scarlett Johansson suing, and you want to be part of that conversation in your content,
Yeah.
whether it's social or not. How do you create an operational framework that can still support that flexibility?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think it's important to have. And it kind of fits in with what we were talking about before. That bottom layer is things like a content brief. Maybe it's like your always on task list that's just kind of you click a button and you get your consistent task list so you don't miss anything. I think coming up with the top layer, that upper layer, is a good way to help with this. And I think about that upper layer as one, um, you have to have a home for all of the stuff that you do. And one of those pieces is like, what's your plan? What's your upcoming plan for what you're working on? But it's also like, here's our tone and voice doc, so everybody can understand how to write in our brand voice. It's our content calendar. It's like the themes and the audiences and the topics that we're talking about. I feel like I bring it up because you get questions like this all the time over Slack, over email. People are like, "Hey, do you have a link to this doc? How do I do this? What's this?" And I think when you send people 3 links, like their eyes just kind of glaze over and they're like, "I'll get to it if I get to it," and then they never do, and then they just ask you again. But if you have like a 1 link, one solid home in Notion, it's our content team wiki page, and it has like every resource you could possibly imagine. You send them one thing, and you're like, "Hey, we're a strategic function. We're important here, and we have all of these good resources. Go check them out." And it forces people to kind of self-serve a little bit, but it does help them. It does help give you a little bit more of that breathing room to say, this is our plan, but also give you some adaptability to say, oh, but that trend is happening right now. We're going to jump on it, and know that you're not like crazy, crazy scheduled, and people will kind of work around your plan if they have access to it.
Do you follow, just curious, like in your own team, any sort
Yeah.
of methodology, Agile, or I'm sure there's a million others, but as you think about kind of, again, that plan, but with flexibility?
Yeah, it's a good question. We not really. We have like our OKRs that we plan out every quarter,
Yeah.
and that kind of just guides us. I think it's nice when I like using OKRs because it's very much more focused on like, here's our North Star, here's what we're working towards. Um, and you can fill in the gaps underneath it. And so it gives us a little bit more flexibility. Um,
Yeah, I love that.
I feel like I've said strategic a million times, but I feel like content is often not viewed as a strategic function within an organization. Um, but when you can take on an OKR and create projects that like are content led as opposed to like content supported, um, it gives us more flexibility, and it's like a good way to plan ahead.
Absolutely. So with that, it feels like getting alignment across teams. Sales is obviously a big one, but probably also
Yeah.
CS in all of the that you're creating. You know, that feels like one of the best outcomes or biggest outcomes of good ops. And so curious if you have any examples or tips on kind of making sure that alignment is, or maybe given your analogy earlier of the layers, like where does
Yeah.
alignment really fit in how you're thinking about that?
Yeah. I think it kind of fits in across all those layers. Like I think probably the simplest, and it isn't novel in any way, so I can't take credit for coming up with like any idea here, but like you kick off when you have an idea. I think it's really easy to just like, hey, I want to write a blog post about this, and you just kind of go and hope it works out for the best. But I think there are a lot of inputs that can come into those ideas that can help shape them a lot better. And so you just get people in the same room. Like I'm creating a blog post. Well, have the forethought to say, where's it going to go? Who's it going to go to? You can pick out your cross-functional partners right then. Like I know this can be used by demand gen. It can be used in a product marketing campaign. It can be used by sales. So I need to get those people in a room. One, to give them a sense of what I'm working on, what's coming, but two, like you never know what inputs you can get from other people. Like people will be like, oh, that sounds good as a blog post, but I think like our audience might want to watch that in a webinar. And you're like, oh, that changes. Same topic, but like still good to get those. It can help influence your decision making. And so I think it's good to be open. And I think it's like more people when they feel like they are helping to shape things, you get that buy-in, you get that emotional buy-in to what you're working on. And so I think people are far more willing to get involved and help and feel accountable to the work and making sure it's getting across the line. And then I think my only second thing would be working towards or figuring out like what shared or mutual goals exist, if any. And like your content has a purpose, get people in the room and understand what they're working on, what their goals are, to see if you can like meet in the middle. Because if not, you have this like inherent tension where you're going to want your blog post to be about a certain topic or like be shaped in a certain way to hit your goals, whereas they want it in a different way, and that tension just creates misalignment across the board. And so I think, again, getting people in the room, having a conversation early on before you start the work is really helpful.
And I think that's something at larger companies that can be so challenging.
Yeah.
It would be great to have someone that can be dedicated to social and dedicated to content. And at smaller companies, that unfortunately is normally one person. The good and bad of that is they know everything that's going on. And so you can almost get those inputs together. And I think what you said actually kind of tees us up for the next question of classic. Okay, you plan everything and you think you've communicated, and then of course, and you think you've kept the scope really well defined. And then of course, at the last second, you get last minute edits or feedback or people who want to have thoughts or opinions, and sometimes valid. They need to be a part of it. But how do you mitigate that as part of the content creation process?
Yeah. I wish there was a better answer. I feel like there's just this kind of inevitability where you're gonna get some feedback regardless of whether you asked for it or want it or not. And I think, and some of that scope creep, I think just happens in general. But so I would say you should prepare for it a little bit ahead of time. But I think there are some ways, like there's some smaller things you can do to have more control over that. One is extend your deadlines a little bit. Like if you, or your timelines a little bit. So you and I may know that a blog post only takes a few days to write, but you give everybody else the ahead and say, blog posts actually take 2 weeks to write at this company. Just like set the standard. There's an SLA and just blog posts need 2 weeks. What that does is it gives you the same amount of space to write, but it budgets in a lot of time for feedback if it comes. Worst case or best case, I guess, is you get no feedback. It's great. And then you just are ahead of the game. Yeah. Worst case is you get a ton. You need to make changes. You kind of shift the narrative a little bit, but because it's baked into your timeline already, there's no pressure of we're going to miss our deadline. There's less pressure to miss a deadline, to deliver things late. Just ahead of time, and you just get everybody else on that same page. So I think that helps. And then also as a part of that timeline, you just give what I try to do ahead of every piece of content. You just set specific deadlines. Like I'm going to get the outline done by this date. You have until the end of the week to give me edits and reviews and feedback. If not, like close for business, we're going to move on without you. Like there has to be some flexibility for, leads and staff and executives, whatever. But I think for the most part, you just set those dates and force people to work within those frameworks.
I mean, that was one of the most effective things I learned managing up. So I used to be an event manager and had to collaborate with executives as speakers or had to get things submitted on their behalf. And it's funny when you said okay, well, it's due on this date, so I'm submitting it here. If I don't hear from you, this is what's getting submitted.
Yeah.
And, and then if they do, I don't want to say care about it because that like is a little derogatory, but like if they really feel the need to have to make changes, they will then find time to prioritize it when in that scenario. Especially if you don't use it all the time. If it's for those moments where it's really needed, I think that's a great suggestion.
Yeah, and I think it's you just have to create space for content and make it a strategic priority for other people. Otherwise, it's like, hey, if you can get to this, great. Odds are it's going to be lower down their priority list because they have their own goals, they have their own priorities to focus on. But if you say, like, this is why we're doing this is why it's important, and we need it by this date, you'll get a response more frequently than you would otherwise. We can say that.
Well, and to what you mentioned earlier about how you guys really leverage the OKRs and then build, I think that also comes into play here in both cases. One, you can
Mm,
tie something to other people about how you're supporting a company or department level OKR, which, and then vice versa, if you get the asks for things, hey, I have this sales deck or I have this one-off request, it almost gives a reason where you don't necessarily have to feel like the bad guy. It's like, hey, this is not quite at the same priority level of these things, which we all are
yeah,
working towards, but I can get to it XYZ time. And I
yeah,
found that that helps a lot.
yeah, definitely. And it's also good to just, I feel like all of this stuff can happen at the beginning, and it's like a good forcing function as you're planning, as you're putting your operations in place. But um, it also can't hurt to say, like, hey, for this piece, we only need this person to review. Like, set your reviewers ahead of time so it doesn't kind of, the spreading ivy effect where it just goes from one person to another, and you're just, those inputs aren't as important. But if you set it at the beginning, like, hey, marketing lead, I need your review on this, just so you know it's coming now. It's less likely to travel.
Well, again, wow, it's like we're just planning going from one project to the next. But one speaking of the OKRs and definitely giving a little Notion plug here.
Yeah.
But we manage our marketing. I do run like a agile light approach to
Mm,
project management. So we, have a 2 week sprint, prioritize, that's all in Notion. And then the flexibility is I've added an OKR column. And so we can put anything that's prioritized to what objective are we focusing on?
right.
And then like what priority level is it? And I think that that has helped when things maybe feel like, okay, are we really like working on the most important, whether to your point, whether it's content or not, a lot of things
Yeah.
tend to be content. Um, and when sometimes it's like, wait, okay, we're just doing a bunch of stuff because we feel a little frantic, like let's pause and make sure everything is
Mm,
lining up. I feel like there's always just felt like there's more alignment and clarity when we do that. And you don't always need a tool in order
yeah.
to create that, but tools can help. So obviously Notion's one, but would love to just hear how you've used tools in the past or like both specific tools and then how you apply those tools into like a good workflow because tools
Yeah.
themselves don't solve these problems.
Yeah. True. And I think what, like, I think there are a few important ingredients for tools to work well. And I think oftentimes what you see is tools wind up working against you a little bit, in that, like, you and I are working on a project together. You're going to work one way. You've got your workflow. I've got my workflow. We still need to be able to collaborate. And I think there are a lot of tools out there that don't have that same level of flexibility. And, like, I'll plug Notion, but, like, there are others out there. I'm sure, maybe. um, but, like, that flexibility piece is really important. And I think in my career, I found that people on my teams, people that I've worked with, they don't feel as empowered if they're forced to work a certain way.
Mm.
And it's like it's like a parallel to micromanagement, right? Like, if you feel like you're being watched all the time, you may have a different response and you might work not as well, or maybe work better. But when you get into a tool and it's, hey, this is how you have to work, that might not fit with what I'm used to, or how I like to work. Like, maybe I'm a little bit more free flowing. Maybe I just kind of do my own thing. That's not going to fit in some of these more rigid tools. So that flexibility is really important. You can still have all the same information. You can still have all the same tasks, but you can work collaboratively, but like it's up to you how you get to that endpoint. And like in Notion, it's especially helpful. Here's my plug. Sorry, everyone, but it's been helpful for us. And I've used Notion at my last two companies and personally, but it is helpful to be able to, like you said, manage your projects, manage your OKRs, but also actually do the work itself next to where you plan, next to where you track, next to where you edit, because it's all happening in one place. And person on, demand gen who may want to get an update can actually see what we're doing because you don't have to pay for, she's already in the tool working in her own workflow
That's
on
been
her
one of
own
my
stuff.
favorite things is I've used Trello, Asana. I will
Yeah.
say I love the creatures of Asana. If Notion ever could figure out like little fun stickers, would just make my heart so happy. Love the
Our
Asana.
illustrations are amazing, but
The
yes.
celebration
Um,
creatures were like my team's personality at my last company.
that's funny.
But it was always so challenging because to point like my CRO or our president would want insights into things and it did sometimes feel like we had to manage in Google Sheets because everyone could see that and then also
Mm,
manage in Asana or Monday because that was actually where the project management, the collaboration to your point worked for our team.
yeah,
Um, but I was like, I don't really want to pay for everyone on the executive team to have a seat just so that they can get access to this visualization. And that's
yeah.
been probably the best thing is even in my own one-on-ones with our CEO saying, well, hey, where's the update to this? And again, very nicely, but like, hey, did you look at our board by chance?
Yeah.
There's an update there, I promise.
Yeah.
And it does make a difference. And Andy Robinson on the call, if you guys don't know Andy, she's so fantastic. But she gave a little plug that she used Notion to help manage everything around the creation and publishing of her book.
Mm,
And which
that's
is on
amazing.
content marketing. And so, there is a lot of use case to it. Again, this is not meant to be a sales pitch
No,
notion.
it's
No,
not.
I'm a big fan.
No.
But to point, like I hate to say there's a little bit of like you adapt. I mean, there's a reality of like I go to a company, they're already using something, the odds of me being able to like rip that out. And I'm sure you guys think
Hmm.
about this in your content of like the change management of that is challenging.
Hmm.
You can adapt a lot of times to like the tools you have
Yeah,
to make it work. And I think that's the most important piece. Like briefing doesn't change regardless of what tool. And having
totally.
goals documented shouldn't change regardless of the tool. But looking, if you have the opportunity to kind of assess your tool stack,
Yeah.
really looking, like you said, that flexibility, the ability to visualize that externally outside of your
Yeah.
department, I think is really important. Um,
The other
Creation.
piece I'll add in here is like scale, right? Like maybe you're not you don't necessarily need to think, hey, what's our content team going to be working on in 5 years, or like how much are we doing? But like, what if next month you have to 2x your output? Is your workflow going to break? Is your tech stack going to like help enable that? And I think there are like mixtures of tools that can get it done. You can do it in Notion, whatever you're doing, but as you scale up, both in org size and in sort of content, like don't like introduce unnecessary barriers where you don't have to.
Mhm.
And if you're jumping from place to place, those are barriers. Those make it hard for everybody to stay on track because, like you said, like some people may not have seats, other people may not always check the tool. Like it just becomes hard. 2x, 5x, 10x your content output, odds are something's going to break if you don't think about the operational piece at the beginning.
Sure. Um, we are just at time, which is
Yeah.
crazy. I feel like this has flown by. But to kind of wrap us up, would love to hear, like at the end of the day, all of this is meant towards driving results and creating really
Yeah.
good, helpful content. And so do
Yeah.
you have examples of thinking about measuring success of content and how does content ops fit into supporting that?
Yeah. I feel like content metrics is such a muddy topic. I think it's really hard to measure. I think depending on what you're working on, it's maybe there's some brand stuff you just kind of have to be okay with not really knowing. But I think about directional metrics, like traffic is a good directional metric. It's going to be like, hey, you've got a ton of traffic coming to this page. what does that mean? Well, it means you should explore it more because maybe it's telling you people love it. Maybe, hopefully not, it's telling you that people are can't wait to get to your page to see how awful it is. But you're not going to know that from just looking at a traffic number. But then there are more direct numbers like a webinar registration number or like a a report download or something. And so I think it's important to kind of separate those metrics and also understand like what the purpose of your content is. Because like my blog post may not always be driving signups. Maybe it's just awareness, right? And so content I think is unique in that everything is kind of piece by piece and the metrics may change for 10 different blog posts, they may be different. And then the operational side, it's good if you can figure out how to bring all of these numbers, all of these reports, all of these pieces into one place. And so whether it's you're measuring your OKRs and tracking them, whether you're seeing what your content output is by a monthly basis, whether you're tracking your traffic, connect like a connected, we'll bring it back to tools for a second, but and what we do at Notion is some people have access to certain tools, but they connect them into Notion. So I can go into our Notion instant workspace and say, I can see all the different dashboards because they're just connected. And I don't have to go into the seat and all those different tools. It makes my life a lot easier because I know where I can go to find it. But I can also just keep up with these metrics. So having a good like connected tech stack where the data flows in and you can keep track of it is really important.
That is awesome. I can't believe we're already 30 minutes down in this. I know we could probably keep talking about operations for quite some time and maybe we'll do a part two. But Drew, thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate you sharing your insights with us. I know we were talking earlier about a great blog your team wrote on how you do leverage Notion. And so we'll definitely include that for everyone to take a look at in our post-webinar email tomorrow. But again, Drew, thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, it was great. I had a lot of fun. If you have any questions, like reach out, chat with me. But
yes, I dropped Drew's LinkedIn in the chat, so be sure to connect with him.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. All right, everyone. Well, I hope you have a great long holiday weekend. Thanks for joining. We have one more series next Thursday where we're going to be talking about distribution and repurposing content. So please make sure to register and I will hope to see you all then. Enjoy the rest of your day.